Claudius Amyand. His name has almost faded from the annals, yet he was the one who revolutionized a chapter of medicine. A French Huguenot who fled persecution, he became a royal surgeon at the court of George III in England. His life was fraught with danger. He didn't merely treat, he operated. His hands performed miracles when others succumbed to fear and ignorance. He dared to risk when no one else would. He became a pioneer, blazing a trail into the unknown. In 1735, something incredible happened. He performed the first successful appendectomy in history. This was not a sudden stroke of genius or an instantaneous revelation. It was the result of decades of tireless work, countless observations, and a readiness to challenge entrenched dogmas. Great discoveries do not emerge from nowhere. They are born from struggle, from mistakes, from personal experience, and from a deep, almost intuitive understanding of the human body. For a long time, medicine remained enslaved by dogma. Disease was perceived not as a bodily malfunction, but as divine punishment. Doctors did not seek causes. They followed the precepts of ancient authorities written a millennium and a half before them. Bloodletting was considered a panacea. Mercury was prescribed as medicine. Hygiene was unknown, and infection was not even suspected. Pus in a wound? It was deemed a laudable phenomenon, a sign of purification. This was the norm. Surgery, meanwhile, was a realm of desperation. Without anesthesia, without antiseptics, a surgeon's speed was valued above precision. Operations became torture. Patients' screams echoed through hospitals. Boiling oil was poured into open wounds to stop bleeding, and hot irons were used to cauterize limbs. The pain was unbearable, and death was a constant companion. Only a few survived, and then only due to their extraordinary physical resilience. Every cut could be a death sentence, any inflammation a one-way ticket. This was a world where life hung by a thread, and medicine itself often merely hastened the fall. It was into this world of chaos and hopelessness that Claudius Amyand stepped. A French Huguenot, exiled from his homeland, he didn't just flee persecution. He brought with him a profound distrust of blind obedience to authority. His life had taught him that truth is not always where the majority stands. He became a royal surgeon in England, but his true education began not in palace chambers, but in hospital wards. There, where other doctors saw normalcy, Amyand saw catastrophe. He observed patients whose wounds oozed laudable pus. He witnessed bloodletting draining strength rather than restoring it. He saw how hot irons and boiling oil brought not healing, but unbearable torment. Death was a familiar companion, and too often it came after treatment, not before. Every day, he confronted the obvious. Patients helped, according to all the rules, died, and those who survived did so despite, not because of, the treatment. This reality did not align with the dogmas he had been taught. His keen mind, accustomed to logic and analysis, could not accept such outcomes. How could one continue doing what demonstrably killed? Why did no one question it? He saw colleagues pride themselves on the speed with which they amputated limbs. He witnessed their indifference to screams. He saw ignorance elevated to the status of science. This experience did not merely disappoint him. It engendered in him a deep, almost intuitive understanding. Medicine was on the wrong path. The human body was a mystery, but the answer lay not in ancient texts, but in direct observation, in doubt, in the search for a new way for those who found no help in conventional methods. He was an outsider, but it was this status that allowed him to see the world of medicine without rose-tinted glasses. He became a champion, but his weapon was not vengeance, but a thirst for truth. His thirst for truth led him not to libraries, but to operating rooms. There, amidst screams and blood, Amyand began to apply his own principles. He didn't just observe, he acted. His hands had already performed the impossible. He was the first to successfully remove a bladder stone from a woman through the vagina, an unthinkable feat for his contemporaries, a breakthrough. He saved hundreds of lives by rejecting barbaric methods. He insisted on cleanliness and gentle handling of tissues. He knew the body does not forgive brutality. And then, in 1735, this knowledge faced its greatest test. An 11-year-old boy named Hannes Anderson was admitted to St. George's Hospital with an inguinal hernia that needed to be removed. Amyand undertook the operation, working confidently with practiced movements. Every gesture was precise. But when he opened the hernial sac, his gaze froze. There, beyond what was expected, he saw something strange, an inflamed, blood-engorged, vermiform appendix, and inside it, piercing the wall, was an ordinary pin, dangerous and sharp. This was a moment of truth. Medical dogmas demanded he leave it. The appendix was considered insignificant, and inflammation a laudable sign. But Amyand saw otherwise. He saw a threat. He saw death that could result if the pin continued its path, if the inflammation spread throughout the body. He knew traditional methods would not help. He faced a decision no one had made before, to risk or to retreat and condemn the boy to inevitable death. He did not retreat. In that moment, in that operating room, Claudius Amyand became a trailblazer. With surgical precision, under conditions where any mistake meant demise, he proceeded. Cautiously, step by step, he separated the inflamed appendix. Every movement was meticulously calculated. He did not cauterize it with a hot iron, nor did he pour boiling oil on it, as had been done for centuries. He used his instruments, his knowledge, and his unparalleled courage. He ligated the base of the appendix, severed it, and removed the pin. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Breath was held in the operating room. No one believed in success. But the operation concluded. The boy survived. More than that, he recovered. Slowly but surely, Hannes Anderson recuperated. A month later, he was discharged from the hospital, alive, healthy, and without his inflamed appendix. This was no miracle. It was the result of a daring experiment based on observation and logic. It was the first successful appendectomy in history. It proved that the body could be saved by challenging old rules, by daring to innovate. It was a triumph of reason over dogma. Amyand's audacious experiment was underpinned by a systematic approach. He possessed not only courage, but also a unique capacity for analysis. His methodology was founded on strict empiricism. He trusted his own eyes and logic, not dusty tomes and dogmas written a millennium and a half before him. Every dissection, every operation, every case of illness became for him not merely a clinical episode, but an invaluable source of data. He meticulously recorded symptoms, the course of the disease, and the slightest reactions of the body to treatment. He saw how the laudable pus, of which his colleagues were so proud, actually brought agonizing death. He understood that the human body was not a field for mystical forces, but a complex biological mechanism, and this mechanism could be understood by studying its anatomy and physiology, not by engaging in guesswork or repeating ancient precepts. He constantly sought patterns, cause and effect relationships, even where others saw only chaos. Amyand was not afraid to acknowledge mistakes, perhaps not his own, but the errors of the entire medical system in which he worked. He saw how other doctors, following established rules, repeated the same destructive actions, condemning patients to suffering and death. For him, every tragic outcome was an occasion for deep analysis. He didn't just note the fact of death. He asked himself, what exactly went wrong? How could the course of events have been altered? How should one act differently next time? This constant self-improvement, this insatiable readiness to reevaluate the familiar, shaped his unique surgical practice. He didn't just operate. He learned from every patient, every outcome, every failure, transforming them into invaluable experience. He did not keep his revolutionary discoveries secret. Amyand actively published his works, often choosing French for his treatises. This was no accident. Publishing in French allowed him to share knowledge with a wider circle of European colleagues, many of whom also sought new approaches, but were constrained by the entrenched traditions of their countries and local medical communities. His records were models of precision and detail. They didn't merely describe rare clinical cases. They offered new, scientifically substantiated methods, new solutions for problems previously considered insoluble. He believed that knowledge should be accessible to accelerate progress. He understood that the delicate work he performed required delicate instruments, Amyand did not merely use what was available in the arsenal of his time. He was not afraid to adapt existing instruments, changing their shape or size to meet his stringent requirements for precision and minimization of trauma. He may even have designed new, specialized devices that allowed him to perform operations with unprecedented accuracy. His approach to instrumentation was as innovative as his methods. He knew that a surgeon's hands are an extension of their mind, knowledge, and will, and instruments must be worthy of this responsibility, an extension of his mastery. Thus, step by step, Claudius Amyand did not simply perform one successful operation that made history. He set a precedent. He showed that true knowledge is born not from blind faith in authorities, but from meticulous investigation, from doubt, from a willingness to challenge established notions. He was not merely a surgeon. He was an engineer of the human body, a thinker, and a reformer. His legacy is not only the lives saved, but also a new way of thinking, a new approach to medicine that paved the way for future generations of doctors and scientists who dared to see beyond the conventional. However, the triumph of reason demonstrated by Amyand was not met with enthusiasm. On the contrary, his audacious actions, which saved the boy's life, provoked a veritable storm of indignation among the learned men. The old guard, who for decades had clung to the ancient precepts, saw Amyand not as a savior, but as a dangerous heretic. His success was a direct challenge to their authority, their infallible rules. They immediately assailed him with accusations. He was called a charlatan. His methods were labeled reckless. Doctors whose hands were accustomed to bloodletting and cauterization with hot irons could not accept gentle tissue handling. They could not comprehend how one could remove an insignificant appendix that, in their conviction, played no role whatsoever. How could one interfere with what might have been divine punishment or laudable inflammation? His actions went against everything they had been taught for centuries. In medical assemblies, his name was uttered with contempt. He was blamed not only for performing an unheard-of operation, but also for the very idea that the body could be understood differently than through old treatises. He attacks the foundations, they cried. He is dangerous to patients, others echoed. Complaints poured in. There were attempts to strip him of his right to practice, to declare him an outlaw. His status as a French Huguenot, an outsider in the English medical world, only added fuel to the fire. They tried to push him out, to silence him, to erase him from history. But Claudius Amyand had powerful patrons. His status as royal surgeon at the court of George III provided him with protection that no medical council could offer. The royal family and the highest nobility of England saw not dogmas, but results. They saw lives saved. They saw Amyand alleviating suffering where others merely shrugged. The undeniable facts of his successes, confirmed by actual healings, became his primary defense. Every recovered patient was living proof of his correctness, and this proof was stronger than any accusation, stronger than any ancient dogma, stronger than any slander. Despite the royal protection bestowed upon him by George III, the attacks on Claudius Amyand did not cease. The old guard could not reconcile themselves. Their world, built on centuries-old dogmas, was cracking under the pressure of his success. They demanded explanations. They craved revenge. And soon, such an opportunity arose. In 1736, just 1 year after the historic appendectomy, the Medical Council, comprised of London's most influential and conservative doctors, initiated a formal inquiry. This was not merely a dispute, it was a trial of a new path. Amyand was summoned to the hearings to account for his reckless methods. Accusations rained down one after another: violation of canons, dangerous experiments, and assault on the fundamentals of medical art. They were oblivious to the fact that these fundamentals had cost thousands of lives. At this assembly, in a stuffy hall reeking of old parchments and outdated convictions, gathered those who considered themselves the pillars of medicine. They expected the Huguenot outsider to make excuses, to crumble before their authority. But Amyand did not make excuses. He brought with him not words, but facts. He presented detailed records of his operations, not only the appendectomy, but hundreds of other cases where his methods saved the hopeless. He spoke of clean wounds, of gentle tissue handling, of logic, not mystical forces. He spoke of real patients who were now living. His strongest argument was not on paper. He brought the boy himself, Hannes Andersen, the very one whose life he had saved by removing the inflamed appendix with the pin. A living, breathing testament. The boy stood before them, healthy, full of vigor. He refuted every accusation by his very existence. He was the embodiment of a truth stronger than any dogma. The expressions on the council members' faces shifted. First disbelief, then surprise, and finally, awkwardness. What could they oppose this with? Ancient texts? Their erroneous beliefs? Before them stood not just a surgeon, but a living example that medicine could be different. The verdict was unambiguous. The medical council not only did not revoke Amyand's license, it was compelled to recognize his methods as innovative. This was not merely an acquittal, it was the surrender of the old world to the new. On that day, Claudius Amyand definitively ceased to be an outcast. He became an undisputed authority. His name, which they had tried to erase, was now etched in history as a symbol of the triumph of reason over ignorance. This triumph became a watershed. It gave Amyand not just the right to practice, it gave him the undeniable right to innovate. From then on, his voice resonated louder. His methods gained more adherence. He proved that the true power of a physician lies not in blind adherence to rules, but in the ability to doubt, observe, and act. He didn't just operate, he taught. He blazed a trail. And every recovered patient, every treatise he wrote, every new operation only solidified his status. He became not just a surgeon, but a reformer whose ideas, like seeds, began to take root in the minds of those who dared to follow him. His struggle concluded. His victory opened the door to the future of medicine. After that day, when Hannes Andersen left the hospital alive, the world of medicine could no longer remain the same. The case of the first successful appendectomy performed by Claudius Amyand became more than just a clinical precedent. It fundamentally shifted the paradigm of understanding internal diseases and opened the way for a reassessment of millennia-old protocols. Before Amyand, any acute inflammation in the abdominal cavity, especially something like a ruptured appendix, was considered almost incurable. Patients suffered unbearable pain. Their bodies wasted away, and death occurred in the overwhelming majority of cases, nearing 100%. Doctors merely wrung their hands, offering palliative care or meaningless bloodletting. The story of the boy saved by Amyand radically changed this grim prognosis. It proved that internal organs could be operated on, that the source of a deadly infection could be removed, and that life could be saved where previously only an inevitable end was foreseen. This did not lead to the immediate widespread adoption of appendectomy. Decades would pass before its broad implementation. But the seed was sown. Surgeons received the first irrefutable proof that intervention in the abdominal cavity was not always fatal. Medical protocols themselves also changed, albeit gradually. Before this moment, laudable pus was considered a sign of purification. Amyand, by his example, showed that pus was an infection that needed to be removed. He insisted on the cleanliness of instruments and hands, on gentle handling of tissues. His records, published in French, became an invaluable guide. They didn't just describe a unique case. They meticulously outlined a new philosophy of surgery: careful observation, precise diagnosis, minimal trauma, and the removal of the problem's source rather than merely fighting symptoms. This was a rejection of chaotic, barbaric methods in favor of a methodical, logical approach. On an institutional level, Amyand's public recognition by the medical council sent a powerful signal. It was not just an act of justification. It was official endorsement of the empirical method and openness to innovation. The council, which had for decades stood guard over ancient dogmas, was forced to concede to the undeniable facts and living testimony. This event set a precedent for future generations of doctors to question old rules, to seek new solutions based on observation and results. Academic circles, previously confined to copying ancient treatises, were now compelled to turn their attention to clinical practice and real outcomes. Although Claudius Amyand did not live to see the era of widespread antiseptics and anesthesia, his contribution was fundamental. He didn't just perform one operation, he turned a page in the history of surgery. demonstrating that the human body is not a mystery subject only to mystical forces, but a complex mechanism that can be understood and repaired. His works and the very fact of his victory over the conservative elite served as a catalyst. They inspired other surgeons to undertake risky but scientifically sound interventions. He showed that the path to saving lives lies through courage of thought, precision of action, and a willingness to challenge established notions. His legacy is not only the boy he saved, but also the hundreds of thousands of lives that would be saved thanks to the principles he established that day. He paved the way for modern abdominal surgery, where every inflammation, previously a death sentence, could now be cured. Claudius Amyand. His name, once almost erased from the annals, now shines as a beacon guiding the way through the darkness of ignorance. The paradox of his legacy is that the greatest breakthrough in medical history was achieved not by an academic rooted in the system, but by an exile, an outsider who rejected blind obedience. He was a royal surgeon, but his true crown was not a title, but the audacity of thought that allowed him to become a true avenger for those who died due to dogma. His triumph, which saved a small boy's life, was met not with praise and recognition, but with furious resistance and attempts to destroy him, for he dared to challenge the very foundation of their world. Only undeniable living proof, standing before the conservatives, compelled them to concede to the obvious, recognizing the power of fact. The story of Claudius Amyand is not just an account of the first appendectomy that changed the fate of millions. It is an eternal lesson about the cost of truth and how fragile progress can be. It shows that knowledge rarely comes from the center, from established dogmas and centuries-old traditions. It often originates on the periphery, in the hands of those who dare to question the accepted, who are willing to observe and act against all odds. His path demonstrated that medical progress is always a struggle, a battle for the right to see the human body not as a field for mystical forces, but as a complex, knowable mechanism. A fight for the right to know and the right to save, even if that knowledge contradicts what generations have been taught. And this right is won not in dusty libraries, rewriting ancient texts, but on the operating table, where courage of thought meets the reality of human suffering and hope. Claudius Amyand did not merely save one life, he changed the course of history, proving that the future of medicine belongs to those willing to challenge the past for the sake of the present, who are not afraid to be outcasts for the sake of saving others. His legacy